All right, we are official. All right, so I'm going to ask everybody mute themselves. We're going to have questions at the end, and everybody mute themselves except for Joanne. And I'm going to hand the floor over to Joanne, who's going to introduce our guest.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you so much, Jody, for being here tonight. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I have the honor of introducing you. It was probably about 10 years ago. I traveled to the Dominican Republic, hopped on a boat and headed out to Silver Bank for the opportunity of being in the water with humpback whales. I'd never done that. And it was on that trip that I first met Jody and saw these amazing underwater photos that she does. The humpback mothers and their calves, and as well as juveniles and adults. I mean, when you're there, you get really good, beautiful views. The water's clear, et cetera. So that was my first experience with Jody. Pretty amazing. And then since then, I've connected with her on Facebook and sort of followed her travels, many places, north and south, extreme north, extreme south, all around the world, and watched her continue to do these incredible photos and win many wonderful awards, well-deserved. And I was also lucky enough to do a workshop with her out on a whale watch in Monterey Bay, which really improved my on-the-water photography skills, which was great. As time goes on, she just continues to amaze and inspire me. And I think it's a real treat to have her with us tonight. And I hope you enjoy meeting her and seeing her work. Thank you.
Wow. So am I on?
You're on.
Great. Well, thank you, Stephanie, for the invite. And thank you, Joanne, for the very kind introduction. And I will try not to let you down tonight. I'm going to share my screen, and we will. Okie dokie. Just forget to go back to PowerPoint. All right, so can everybody see the screen?
Yes, perfect.
Right. And before I actually get going, and I've got quite a few slides tonight, and I don't want to take too long to go through them, but I did want to just give you a little bit of a background on my photographic journey. And it started when I was 12. My father gave me my first camera, which was a Brownie Hawkeye box camera. I used it to take photographs of my dog and my other pets. We had a lot of animals. I didn't have any brothers or sisters, but I had, a dog, and we had tortoise and parakeets and lizards, and anyways, all kinds of animals. And then in high school, I took a darkroom class. I got a lot of support from my dad, encouragement to do photography. And at some point, I just do it. It was camera. I used it. I upgraded from the box camera to a rangefinder to one of the first SLRs. I think I had a Canon F1. And I decided at some point, after having gotten a decent photos in Yosemite, that maybe I should go and learn something about my cameras and learn more. And I went to community college, and I took a class there with Ted Orland, who had printed for Ansel Adams. And Ted was very creative, and it was a wonderful experience. And sometime that was probably, sorry, you're going to move me. That was probably in my 30s. And then my 40s, I went back to school. I had started out with an interest in biology, but it wasn't the kind of biology I wanted. I went to start at UC Davis. I was going to be a veterinarian. Came to UC Santa Cruz, and they didn't have, it was a lot of microbiology and things like that. I wanted mammals. So I switched when I went back 20 years later to art, and I'd already taken a lot of art history courses. This is one of the photographs from them, and I know that the subtitle of tonight's talk is, about marine species, but the title is Water, Water Everywhere. And this photograph actually works. It was film at the time. It was probably, I don't even remember what camera it was, but it's water that makes this photograph, because what I'm doing is I'm shooting through this oak forest on campus down to a parking lot full of cars. And because of the fog, the cars are not there. Without the fog, it would not have been a photograph at all. So let's just move on to marine species and catch up with how I got involved in that. And in 2002, a friend of mine had chartered the boat that Joanne was, well, it wasn't the same boat, but it was the same trip going out to the Silver Bank and the Dominican Republic that Joanne mentioned. And because of 9/11, nobody wanted to fly and she couldn't fill the boat. And at that time, I had been leading small safaris to Southern Africa, and I couldn't really, people were paying my way. I couldn't really afford to do the trip, but because she was desperate, she made a deal that I couldn't refuse. And so I was going on this 1 week to swim with whales, and I couldn't afford to go buy fancy housing for my not very fancy camera. So I took a $15 disposable underwater camera. I had 12 frames. 2 of them came out. This was one of them. I entered it into a competition in the American Cetacean Society. I got second place. But more than that, the whales just stole my heart. And I knew I had to go back. But I still didn't make a lot of sense, for 1 week to invest in a fancy housing. So I bought what was called an Iwa marine housing, called it a plastic bag housing. And I thought I needed to use a telephoto lens. So it had like an accordion plastic. But what I found is that when I wanted to shoot wide, this accordion, the plastic was in my frame. So for that week, I had to shoot, with an extended telephoto, and I got these kind of odd images. But I decided I needed to go back, and if I was going to go back, that I needed to go for more than 1 week. That was in 2002. I've been going every year since. Some years I've gone 4 weeks at a time. I've probably been out there about 45 weeks now. So the next year I brought my, it was my first digital camera. It was the Canon 20D, which was the second model that Canon had made. And I had an iClide housing, and I began to actually be able to control what I was photographing to the extent that you can control anything with animals. But I could deal with the composition, the light, etc. This is my friend Jeff, who is one of our guides out there. He's still one of our guides. And, his equipment sort of dates the photo as well, because he now has a really nice mirrorless camera that it's far more compact than the video camera he had inside that big barrel. And there was a calf coming over to check him out. And at that time, we would stay in a line behind our guide. The guide would be up ahead, and we had this amazing life-changing experience where this calf, who we had dubbed Junior, had been out in front, ahead of Jeff, and all of a sudden, unbeknownst to me, the calf just swam from behind and came up underneath me. And by then, I had a wide-angle lens, because I remember calling the guy at B&H Photo, and I told him what I wanted to shoot. And he said, well, you've got to have a wide angle lens. And I said, but what if the whales aren't close enough? And he said, well, then it's not worth taking the photograph. And he was absolutely right. Of course, this was a little closer than I had intended, because if you know anything about wide angle lenses, that whale's pec fin is just about to hit me in the face. And the calf's staring at me. And the next frame, he very carefully misses my hat, continues on his way. And what you're looking at there are the ventral pleats, which we'll see later expanded, going down to his navel, which is there on the right. And as he finished this pass, he tapped my housing with his fluke. And, I had it held in both hands, and he went on his way. And I thought, wow, that was interesting. But I wasn't sure I wanted to repeat it. So I went down to the other end of the line. And 5 minutes later, the calf found me down there, did the same thing once again, so rapidly I couldn't even get any photos. And as he completed it, instead of tapping the camera, he lifted it up out of the water and then set it back down again. Of course, I'm still holding it. And I realized at that time, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his reflection in the dome port of that housing. So I've never had a whale attempt to do that since, and that's just as well, but it was quite an extraordinary experience, highlighting the intelligence and the curiosity of these animals. He did a a science experiment. He realized it took more effort. And the next time he actually lifted it up, and in an effort to try and understand what this thing that looked like a whale was that didn't look like a whale. So I'll just show you a few of my my images that are just what I call sort of artistic, photographs of the humpback whales. This is a mother and a calf and an escort down there in the background. The mother is a whale that was identified named Rooftop, and because from the white on her top of her dorsal fin, and also from the special markings on her fluke. And her calf, we saw them on Valentine's Day. This is out on the Silver Bank again. Calf had a nice heart-shaped markings on its chest. And then we heard that they made it up to Newfoundland, which is where the mother's feeding ground was, and were seen on the July 4th with the calf breaching. Here's another image also from the Silver Bank. Again, the light plays a really important part in composition. In my way of thinking, what makes this an image is the pec fin that's extended from the part of the mother, which is actually what we call a pec check, because there was one of the guests who got so excited he just kept swimming too close to the whale. And we try and keep a reasonable distance. That pec fin's 15 feet. And I managed to photograph her without the fellow in the water, but I think I grabbed his fin and pulled him back at that point in time. This mother calf pair is photographed in Tonga. I've been there several times, but I don't plan to go back. I don't care for the way they manage the program. I don't think it's that good for the whales, but the water tends to be really spectacularly clear. It's an island archipelago, so the waters are somewhat sheltered. And I start to think of storytelling when I photograph the whales. And to me, this is about the serenity of a mother and a calf on the breeding grounds. And I just want to throw in something here about why I photograph. And I do it for a number of reasons. One that's not very high fancy reason is I don't have a great memory, and I take photographs, and I have these prompts to remember what was going on. But I do it because I'm interested in conservation. I'm interested in art. I'm interested in science, and I'm interested in sharing and educating people to further all of those means. Here is another calf from Tonga. And if you look at the positioning of the eye on this calf, they're on the side of the head, basically looking downwards. The whales can't look up unless they change their body position. And so it's not surprising to see a calf or even an adult become vertical, because that way they can see now what's in front of them instead of what is beneath them. And again, the light is critical in making the photograph. We just see a bit of the mother down there on the bottom. And here is another mother calf in Tonga. This is a more typical coloration. The South Pacific whales have a lot of white on their bodies. And I'll just bring your attention to the little wispy bubbles coming out of this mother's blowhole, of a single blowhole. And I know some folks have said to me, oh, that's just a leaky valve. I don't think so. I've seen the same thing with mothers on the Silver Bank, and I don't know if it's some kind of a signal to the calf, but I've become incredibly fascinated with bubble use by humpback whales. So I'm going to follow a few threads through here, because what I'm really fascinated by most is behavior. And feeding behavior is particularly interesting, because how different species feed, I don't know, it puts Dr. Seuss to shame. I mean, the fact that we have all these different, great variety of species on the planet, and they all manage to survive with different modalities and different tools. Excuse me, here is a calf nursing in the Silver Bank. We don't see that very often. Usually the mothers will nurse fairly deep in the water column, although the water's relatively shallow, and we are only allowed to snorkel at the surface. But this mother was not concerned, nor was the calf, so she's nursing close by. And here's another, another photograph, the same mother and calf. And in this case, I've chosen to take in the whole, the environment. So you've got the sun rays coming down, you've got the coral, bits of coral and the sand on the bottom. While we're on the topic of feeding, back to Monterey Bay, and this is a female killer whale, transient killer whale, they're mammal eaters, and her name is CA-138. Somebody needs to give her a proper name. And she had been hunting a common dolphin. She had two offspring with her. And in this case, in this moment, she did this massive tail throw, which I'm certain was to stun the dolphin. And in the next frame, and I just got incredibly fortunate to be able to get, all of this. I mean, part of it's a matter of practice, but still, there was another very talented photographer on the boat. There were only three of us, along with the captain, and he missed the action. But CA-138 porpoised out of the water, hit this dolphin, lifted it up into the air. And if you look carefully, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you can see her tooth marks where she's had this dolphin in her mouth, and she didn't kill it. She could have just bitten down and that would have been it. But instead, and these next several frames happened within 1 second on the count on my camera, she basically tossed it through the air, stunned it, landed, and her two juveniles came over, and she came to join them and watch them make the kill. So basically what we were able to witness was a teaching event where she stunned the animal, showed her offspring how to do that, and then allowed them to make the kill. So, we talk a lot about instinct in animals, but there's a vast amount of learning that takes place. Here is another teaching situation with transient killer whales in Monterey Bay, and they were taking turns, and I know that can be difficult to watch, taking turns tossing this young elephant seal into the air, again, to stun it. Different whales would do this, and sometimes instead of using their mouths, they would bat it with their flukes. And the poor elephant seal doesn't have much choice in the matter, but it's the only way these animals can actually learn to properly hunt so they can feed themselves and their families. Again, a similar situation with a sea lion, where we watched for quite some time where these killer whales would bounce off they would sort of porpoise on top of the sea lion. They would push it around, they'd hit it with their tails, and finally, they did, they basically killed it in the process. And then they fed their families, and it's a difficult thing sometimes, but it's, what we call the circle of life. I chosen to just show the aftermath of a gray whale kill, because if you thought that last image was difficult, watching them take down a gray whale calf that's been brought from the lagoons in Baja as far as Monterey on the way north can be quite difficult. And this case, when their whales aren't terribly hungry, the killer whales, they'll feed on the tongue. It's their favorite part. They'll feed on the lower jaw, and they may leave the rest of the carcass. If there are other family members or other pods around, I've seen where the whole carcass has been consumed by quite a number of killer whales. And then sometimes that doesn't happen, and then the carcass washes ashore. You may have sharks. In fact, some of these are shark bites on this carcass here, and maybe the tail will feed on it. A lot of the carcasses just sink to the bottom and become what's known as whale fall, and then they feed worms that specialize in bones and octopuses and all kinds of animals down there that are very different. Usually the ones that remain closer to the surface and then come to shore may have been fed on sharks before they get there, or then birds will attempt to get through the fibrous tissue. But killer whales aren't the only ones to go after whales, although with sharks, it's usually a deceased animal. I've never heard of a shark actually taking down either a calf or an adult. And this was an interesting case because This is in an area we call Shark Park off of Aptos, where during the blob, when the blob, which is that vast amount of warm water, unseasonably warm water off the coast of California, starting around 2013 through 2016, sharks or for shark nurseries, where they prefer much warmer water, ended up coming into Monterey Bay in this area around Aptos and the cement ship. And even though the water temperature has changed, the nursery still, continues there to this day. The scientists believe because it's a sheltered area and the water is a bit warmer and it's more protected. And this shark was a juvenile, so they are feeding on fish at that point in time, but it couldn't let go of this great opportunity, but it was having an exceptionally difficult time making any headway through the very tough fibrous tissue. You can see a few bites taken out on the back of the head, a few by the tail, and then show you a little bit. I don't know if it's the same shark because there were at least 3 while I have my drone up. And, the blubber is very rich in energy for the animals that are feeding. But the shark had to try on the tail because that was the only thing it could get much of a purchase at all. And we'll watch for just a minute because at the end of this clip, something quite amazing actually happens. And you can see what a tough time the shark is having actually trying to get a bite and even get a snack off of this whale. It's amazing to me because we are certain that, sharks are these massively horrible predators. And yet the young have a very difficult time. Their jaws aren't developed yet to be able to even take a bite off of a whale. Although I have to say a whale is much more fibrous than a human. And people swim, very close to this shark nursery, and there's never been a problem there. So again, it's trying. And as it crosses over, suddenly this great tail swishing. I've shown this to shark experts. They think that what happened is as the shark crossed over the fluke of the peduncle or the tail stalk of that whale, that somehow it thought, its own tail was getting entangled or something, and it just kicked off. So this is a photograph of feeding in Norway, and I don't consider it one of my better photographs at all, but I threw it in here because it was an amazing experience, and yet it was a challenge. I don't dive, and I tried to rent a dry suit here in California, and nobody would rent me one because I wasn't certified to dive. So I got one in Norway. We have to have a dry suit. It's way too cold. It was wintertime there. And by the time I got it out to the boat, it was so cold I couldn't get the seal over my head. So our guide was able to lend me his suit because he had just had foot surgery, and I wore it. It fit great, but I didn't have a chance to do the practice swim. And now I've got these massive, large mitts on my hands where you can't do anything with them. And my settings were all wrong, so everything was totally underexposed. It was late in the day. It was in November, so only a couple of hours of sunlight anyways. It was snowing topside. Looks like it's snowing underwater, but that's actually the scales of herring. It was quite an extraordinary experience, except that I won't go back because, again, I don't care for how the whale swim program is operated there. It's not in the best interest of the whales. Back to Monterey Bay, and seeing surface lunge feeding whales like this is one of my very favorite things. And that's the image I have on my screen before the talk. And what you're seeing here are 4 humpbacks feeding on anchovies. They have come up from beneath and they open their mouths, and I mentioned on that calf, the ventral pleats, you can see the underside of the jaw here have expanded. They engulf a tremendous volume of water and the fish, and they have baleen in their mouths, which is like an interior mustache. And as the water filters out, the fish are trapped inside. You can see here, there's a few anchovies escaping off here on the right. Again, a different angle, great expansion of those ventral pleats. This is just water that's pushed up when the whale came up with such force to catch the fish before they escape. And a mother and a calf, again from the side. Calves have to learn how to do this feeding on their own. And here, this was a whale that had created its own niche, where it came over to an area called Mitchell's Cove on the Santa Cruz side. This was, again, during that heyday of the blob, where millions of anchovies came inside the bay. And we had, on one day, several of us collectively photographed 100 different whales who were identified through citizen science website, Happy Whale. And many of them had never been seen inside the bay before. But this whale would swim the same path each day, and Mitchell's Cove it was fairly shallow water, so it would swim from east to west. It was so shallow that it would use you could see it using its pec fins to herd the fish forward, and when it got to the far side of the cove, it would lunge, it would bunch the fish up, it would lunge, the fish had no place to escape except upwards. And my son reminded me later that, this was in 2015, that on that side of Mitchell's Cove is a sewer outfall line that goes out 3 miles out into the ocean. But as it leaves shore, it's elevated on a concrete wall. And this whale was using that wall as a tool, herding the fish towards it, and then making its lunge. And the water was too shallow for the whale to lunge vertically. So it was very clever. Whoops, sorry. And just one more photograph of this, where you get to see the birds and sea lions who get in on the act. The usual sort of protective behavior of a school of fish is to bunch up, and that makes it easier for them to escape from birds, or of course the gulls need them right up the surface, or from sea lions. But it's a bad strategy when you're dealing with humpback whales, who prefer a large clumped up school. But when they do lunge, they stun some of the fish that they don't catch, makes it easier for the birds and the sea lions to join in. Oops, sorry. Now up to Alaska, Southeast Alaska, where they have what's called bubble net feeding. It may be similar, looks similar to the surface lunge feeding, but they actually have a feeding call, which we'll hear, and then they have a net that they blow. Usually it's a cooperative venture. This was a solitary whale feeding next to a small island where there's a lighthouse. You can see the remnants of its bubble net. And when it came up, instead of an aggressive lunge or an energetic lunge, it just kind of rose to the surface and kept its mouth open, allowed the water to just sort of drain out. We were able to ascertain that it was feeding on juvenile herring, and the herring weren't smart enough or didn't have enough energy to actually attempt to escape. And somehow the whale knew that, understood that, and used a slightly different technique for feeding on them. Here we have, this is from last summer, it was part of a group of 20 humpback whales who were bubble net feeding together, and was quite an extraordinary opportunity. We watched the same group more or less. The composition changed a little bit each day for 4 days straight. And I'm going to show you a video of this. Wait. Oh.
Left, bubbles to the left. Oh.
Right here.
Bubble net. Perfect. All these hungry mouths. And I would just mention that I begun taking small groups up to Southeast Alaska on a private charter, which is where this video is taken. It's in August. Trips this August are full, but I will be doing some in 2025. Only have 6 passengers, me and the captain and the chef. So if anybody's interested, you can email me and I'll put you on the list. And speaking of lists, this was on my bucket list, which was to see feeding humpback whales in Antarctica. And there are actually 2 whales in this photograph. And instead of feeding on small fish, on forage fish like herring or anchovies, the whales down there feed on krill, which is about at least twice the size of the krill we have here off the coast of California. But it was very special to see the feeding amongst these icebergs. Got other animals feeding as well. So here's a California sea lion in Monterey Harbor back in maybe 2015. All of these anchovies, and you can see how they just, the water's part makes it a lot harder for the sea lion to actually grab a bite. This was more recently off the photographed, this is not a drone image, but it's photographed with my camera on a wide-angle lens off of the commercial wharf in Monterey, and it was almost comical. These poor sea lions are having a really hard time actually catching the fish, because every time they would approach, the fish would, part the waters, and away they would, they would go. In addition, we have animals that are not mammals. So we have leatherback turtles. We don't see many of them, but they nest over in Indonesia, and they swim across the ocean, and they come here and they feed largely on jellies. This is one feeding on an egg yolk jelly. And because of this behavior, it's even more important not to release helium balloons. We see them for birthdays, we see them for graduation, for Mother Days. They're floating in the ocean because people let them go either on purpose or by mistake. And it's just incredibly unfortunate, because it can kill these animals, and the strings can wrap around the legs of birds as well. This is my favorite fish. It's called a mola mola, or an ocean sunfish. Very curious looking fish, looks nothing like other fish. And here it is, attempting to eat a little hydrozoan. These fish will feed on various jellies. They have like cartilaginous hooks inside their mouths to keep them from slipping back out. Here's a close-up of one of the vellulas and its reflection, and just barely see its tentacles over here on the left side. As this purple gelatinous platform. And if any of you have been to the beach in the last month or so, I don't know if you've had them as far north as your area north of San Francisco, but we've had a great bloom of them in Monterey Bay this summer. And then, of course, they're at the mercy of the wind, and they wash up on shore and then dry out. With sea otters, we're fortunate to have sea otters, because the Russian hunters came and nearly extirpated the population, getting their furs, which were then sold to the Chinese aristocracy. But a small population survived off the Big Sur coast. It was inaccessible. Nobody knew they were there. And we believe that all of the sea otters in Monterey Bay now came from that remnant population. Here's a sea otter thoroughly enjoying a red abalone. And in the heyday of sea otters, the abalones would hide in the crevices of the rocks, because the otters can actually pull them off the rocks. And once the otter population was exterminated, I mean, it's curious that it was the Chinese aristocracy who were involved, but the Chinese fishermen who were discriminated against in Monterey were not allowed to fish the fish. I think they actually had to fish at night, and they started using lanterns, but they decided, to fish the abalones, because now that the otters are gone, the abalones moved back out onto the rocks, and somebody figured out, how to tenderize them. But it's all interconnected. Here is a mother and a pup sea otter feeding on clams. We have another female otter feeding on sea urchins. And many people have heard the story about the loss of otters leading to an overabundance of sea urchins, who then wipe out the areas, creating what are called urchin barrens. They eat the fast holds of the kelp, and they can do serious damage. So it's nice. This is the only time, though, I have to say, that I've ever seen a sea otter feeding on sea urchins, but it's really good to know they're back doing that. Thought I'd throw in a few birds. This is a black-footed albatross on the left and a gull, and they are tussling over some tissue from a gray whale calf that was taken down by the killer whales. I put in this photograph of a Laysan albatross. We maybe get 1 or 2 sightings of them a year. Incredibly beautiful birds. I don't have any photographs of them feeding, but saw one recently, and it was just such a great opportunity to see the full wingspan and the coloration of these beautiful birds. Pelican, right? We've been having a die-off of pelicans this year, which they say seem to be starving. But this is a pelican getting ready to dive. And I'll just show a little bit of this clip of back in around 2014, 15, when we had lots of pelicans and lots of. Just take the sound off. And they're doing the plunge diving, which is typical of how pelicans generally feed. So if you see splashes out on the water sometimes, that's what it is. I'm going to stop this clip and, whoops. Actually, you probably didn't hear all that. But that was typical of that, because I turned my sound off here. It was typical of pelicans doing plunge diving. Well, back in the abundance years, they didn't even have to do that. Lots of them did because there was so much fish. But this pelican was close to shore, and the anchovies were all there as well. And the pelicans were just duck diving, where they'd put their heads in and come up with a pouch full of fish. Going back to Antarctica, this is a Wilson's petrel. This little bird feeds on krill, and the way it manages to do so is it kind of does a little dance and stirs the water with its feet, bringing the krill up to the surface, and then it plucks off a couple here and there. And we have penguins who also eat krill. I mean, krill is a really important part of the food chain. The whales feed on it, the penguins, little birds, lots of animals, some of the seals. And this Gen 2 penguin is getting ready to give a krill delivery to its older chick. And here we have a younger chick receiving a package of krill from its parent. The parents ingest this while they're out at sea. They can't carry them back in their beaks. And then they regurgitate the somewhat digested krill. And you can see, I believe that those black dots are eyes. So you can see it's a relatively large a crustacean, kind of a shrimp-like creature, but much larger than we have in Monterey Bay. But unfortunately for the penguins, sometimes they are what's on the dinner plate. This was taken off of South Georgia. We had an amazing day out at St. Andrews Bay, where we had thousands of king penguins, adults, and then the brown furry chicks who were, out there. It was just fantastic. Had elephant seals. We did a little zodiac cruising. We saw a couple of leopard seals, and we spent all day there. And when we got back to our ship, and we were just getting ready to take our clothes off, word came that a leopard seal had taken a king penguin right off the stern of the ship. And I happened to be at the back. My cabin was at the back. I zipped out there, and lo and behold, managed to witness this amazing encounter where the leopard seal is actually clipping the skin of this poor penguin that's still alive and getting ready to actually skin it. So while we're at the poles, we'll go north. This is up in the Arctic on the island of Svalbard, or the island archipelago of Svalbard. And there's a polar bear and her cub. And we spent about 2.5 hours watching this particular mother and her cub swim from island to island, come out on shore. Here she is drying off, rolling around in the snow. You can see the dark areola of her nipple there, just still nursing the cub. After this, the cub rolled in the snow, learning from mom. And at some point, they clambered up over this hill, and many of the guests in the Zodiac, because of course we're not on shore with them, we're staying safe and giving them space. We're cold, so we went back to the ship. I think it was getting close to dinner time. But our wonderful guide, this is the Cheeseman's Ecology Safaris, and Scott Davis, who now he and his partner own the company, had an intuition, and he took the Zodiac back. He wanted to see where the mother and calf had gone, and they'd gone over to the other side of the island where they snacked on a walrus carcass, or what I call walrus jerky. And my guess is that they had been feeding on this for some time, decided it was time, they'd done enough hunting that day to go back and have some more of this remains of this carcass. And there is the cub, finger looking good. And I would just say, I'd really pick and choose to give you a variety of images and not completely overwhelm you. Behavior. All right, humpback whales are incredibly surface active. They're the most surface active of all the whale species, the large whale species. And I will say, for anybody who does go on a whale watch trip who hasn't, it's almost impossible to photograph the first breach. But fortunately, these animals repeat their behavior. And if you stay attentive and watch them dive, because they dive before they come up and breach again, and know that they're not going to come up in exactly the same spot, you are liable to catch one of a variety of breaches. They come up in different ways. Sometimes it's head breaches. Sometimes they fall towards you. And it's always an amazing, energetic, experience watching them. At least they're energetic. Here's a gray whale on the northern migration breaching off of Carmel. We don't see them breach up here very often, but sometimes we do, which is a treat. And this is a minke whale. It's the first minke whale I ever saw. This is taken off a Stellwagen Bank near Provincetown, Massachusetts. And this whale breached 30 times. Unfortunately, it did so coming towards us. So it was quite an amazing experience, because they don't breach very often, and we don't see them often in Monterey Bay. And when we do, they're very skittish. They disappear. And the pink that you see on this whale was from all of that breaching and bringing the blood to the surface, particularly visible on the white portions of the body. And of course, at least in Monterey, everybody's favorite whale is a killer whale breaching after they've had a successful kill. They will very often celebrate, and that celebration includes spy hops and porpoising and breaching, and sometimes it's called a cuddle puddle, where they're socializing with one another. And here is another breach. This is a female known as Comet, a young female who her family had just taken down a gray whale calf. And it's the only time I've ever seen a breach of a killer whale like this coming full out that way. This is a northern right whale dolphin, and we'll see some more of them in a little bit. Very fast little guys, very atypical. They don't look like your usual dolphin. They've got pointed heads, no dorsal fin, black on top, white on bottom, although this one is an anomalous coloration. It's got a lot more white than most of them have. Pacific white-sided dolphin doing a 360, circle, that's leaping out of the water. It was what I called the Dolphin Olympics, where there was a lot of this behavior going on at the same time. A young Risso's dolphin, again, different head, not your typical bottlenose. It's young, I can tell, because it's got a darker coloration. It has very few scars on it, because they tend to scrape each other up, and they feed on squid, and the squid hooks will get them. And here is another, not as beautiful aesthetically as the preceding photo, where the water was very calm and the reflections were there. But this is more journalistic, in that I've never seen Risso's dolphin breach with its mouth wide open. And you can actually see the little teeth on the bottom jaw there. These dolphins feed largely on squid, and those teeth help keep the squid from slipping back out, and they don't have teeth on the upper jaw. This was taken off the coast of Oregon. It's a stellar sea lion who could surf with the best of them, doing this phenomenal job of body surfing. Is a real treat to actually be able to see it, never mind catch it on a photograph. And I mentioned the northern right whale dolphins. You might wonder what behavior this is. These three dolphins were bow riding. So instead of surfing a wave on their own, they're surfing the bow wave that's made by our boat. This is one of my award-winning images It was an incredible opportunity. The water was absolutely spectacularly flat, calm outside the bay. I've never seen it, rarely seen it like that. And the bow was crowded with people, and this young woman saw me and insisted that I take her spot, for which I am forever thankful. This is a fin whale, and basically fin whale behavior is swimming rapidly. I was down along the Big Sur coast photographing gray whales from shore, from the cliffs, talking with a gentleman from Europe who had come to see condors. And then he says, oh, look, there's another whale. And I looked a little further offshore, and here was a fin whale. This is the only photograph I got of it where the whole body is in the frame, although just barely. They're so long and slender. They're called the greyhounds of the sea. That, and I, of course, couldn't see that well because of the sun, that I cut off part of the whale. But the white right lower jaw like that and the chevron up starting to go behind the head is the classic way of identifying the fin whales. And in terms of whale identification, this is back in Antarctica, and this is a fluke ID photo, where the underside of the fluke of each humpback whale is individual as our fingerprints are. Both the coloration, the scarring, you know, in this case from barnacles, sometimes from entanglement, and the trailing edge indentation. So besides being a photograph that tells the story of whales in Antarctica, that's also a way to identify this particular individual. And I thought the blue whale deserved a little exposure here because they're such amazing creatures. They're the largest animal to ever live on the planet. We rarely, the only time I've ever seen a whole blue whale was one that had been killed by a ship and was up at Bean Hollow State Beach. We never see the whole animal on the water. If you're lucky, they'll fluke up. Most of them don't. Here again, we had beautiful water conditions, a shearwater flying there, and a diving blue whale. Another behavior that we see from time to time, we call kelping. Question is, why do they do it? Probably for multiple reasons. Here is an adult male killer whale carrying a bit of kelp around on its, or a big bit of kelp around on its dorsal fin. I can't tell you why. I don't know whether it's showing it off, whether it feels good, whether, you know, who knows what these guys do and why. And here is a female humpback whale on the Silver Bank who is in a courting pair with a male. They had come over to our boat, which happens often, you know, when they're courting like that. When we get in the water with them, we call them dancers. Sometimes they prefer to hang out with the boats. We call them boat dancers. And here she is luxuriating in sargasso weed, which is a rather prickly seaweed. And I'm assuming that she's doing it for the sensuous experience of it. And we will see that, you know, with humpbacks up in the Monterey area as well. And we talk about them going to the spa. And here we have two gray whale mothers and calves. They are on the northward migration, and they are in the kelp beds, but for a different reason altogether. I mentioned killer whales will take advantage of the deep water channel and the passage, the short way across Monterey Bay is across the mouth, which is like 25 miles. To do the whole circuit of the coastline is 75 miles, and most of the mothers will try and take the short path. But in order to avoid the killer whales, they need to be in shallower water. So they'll hug the coastline on the way up from Baja. They will go through the kelp beds, one, because that's where the kelp is. Two, it makes it even more difficult for killer whales to attempt to get the calves. They have to drown them, so they need deeper water so they can get on top of them. And when it's close to the shore, like in the shore break like that, the sound of the waves masks the blows of the killer whales, of the gray whales, sorry. Blows. Here we are back on the Silver Bank, and this is it's called a primary escort, who is escorting a female, and he is in a competitive group where other males are attempting to kick him off his throne, so to speak, and have the opportunity to escort the female. We assume, but nobody's ever seen the mate, that somehow that gives them a privilege to being able to mate. And here is a guy who's he's expanded his ventral pleats either with air or with water, and they do both. And he's blowing this massive, large bubbles as a way. Both of those are a way of showing his superiority, attempting to intimidate the other whales who are trying to dethrone him. Here we have another whale who's blowing a bubble trail, which the males will often do in the competitive groups as a way of masking, again, showing their prowess and masking the female from the competitors. This is taken in Tonga. You can see the primary escort there blowing a bubble trail, most likely the female ahead of him, and then I guess 4 different challengers waiting for the opportune moment to, butt heads with him, get into a tail slash, etc. This was an exceptional opportunity. This is down by Carmel Bay, and it's 3 blue whales in a competitive group. And fortunately, the captain just happened to see some action in the fog. We went down there and he thought it was killer whales initially, but no. And the whale on the right is a blue whale who, again, in a show of dominance, has brought his whole head out of the water. That whale on the left with the cut off tip of the fluke was a female, and then in front of her is a challenging male. So that was an extraordinary experience. One rarely ever sees that much of a blue whale head when they're alive. But whales aren't the only marine species that hang out in the water. We've got elephant seals, and these are northern elephant seals at Ano Nuevo, 2 juvenile bulls who are sparring. It's not a serious match, but it's a learning experience. They are working on, establishing dominance and learning how to do that, because the adults, only one gets to be the beach master with a particular harem of females. Here we have a male who hasn't got the memo. This female says, "Leave me alone. I'm taking care of my pup right now." He doesn't care. He wants to mate with her. And what does mating do? It leads ultimately to the propagation of the species. And here is a female, again at Ano Nuevo, who's in the process of giving birth. We were quite fortunate. We were up at one of the viewing areas, which are up on the cliffs, and this female was positioned in the right location, facing the right direction, with sun on this newborn pup. It was a pretty exciting opportunity. And imagine you've been in utero for, about a year, and you come out into the new world and you got a face full of sand. And anybody who's had the opportunity to go to the beach as a little kid or with little kids knows what that's like. But there's mom greeting her pup for the first time. She hasn't passed the afterbirth yet. And here a little while later, the sand is dried and the pup is just trying to get its bearings. It's probably the rest of them covered with sand, or her, because mom uses her flippers to put sand on her body to cool off, and gets it over her pup as well. We got more moms and pups, a sea otter carrying her pup on, resting on her body as its bed. And you notice her nose is pink like that. That's because when sea otters mate, the males grab onto the female's nose and sometimes they take off a chunk. So I do not want to come back as a female sea otter. And I just wanted to show a little bit more and talk a little bit more about polar bears in terms of conservation. This photograph was taken in Franz Josef Land, which is a Russian archipelago in the Arctic. And this is sort of what I call a typical polar bear photograph, where there's snow or there's icebergs, not icebergs, ice flows. And polar bears need those ice flows to be able to hunt seals. And so it's a classic, it's a classic polar image. This not so much. This was taken this last summer in Svalbard. Maybe it was 2022. Sorry about that. And it's a mountain climbing polar bear. Part of that is normal because in the summertime, the ice does melt and there's not as many ice flows to be able to catch the seals. When I was there for 10 days, circumnavigating Spitsbergen, which is the main island, we only saw 3 seals. So it was not a good time, but there was also a huge loss of ice relative to normal conditions there. So during these drier times, the polar bears will feed on eggs and chicks, and so they climb the mountains looking for nests. But it's a reminder that we are changing the climate and we are making it harder for some of these species to carry on. Walrus, also an Arctic species. We're no longer hunting them. We, hunted thousands and thousands of polar bears and also walruses. But because we're no longer hunting them, they're no longer afraid of us. And I should just say that except for my wide angle underwater photos, almost everything else I shoot is with a 100 to 500 millimeter telephoto lens. And then I will often crop the images. So I'm not that close to the animals. But you can see this very gentle and curious look in the eye of this male walrus. I'm not sure why some have skin like that and others don't. It's partly a matter of age, but there may be other conditions. Here we have 2 more mature adult males, and they've got these fantastic tusks, sort of external teeth. They use their whiskers for helping to locate mollusks or clams in the sediments, which is what they feed on. They will use their flippers to flush them out. They may use their tusks, and then they slurp the clams out of their shells, and they use the tusk for defense, for sparring with one another, for protecting themselves from polar bears, for resting their heads, and maybe use in feeding. Some of the little species who don't get enough airplay, nettle jelly on the left, a very beautiful specimen, just actually photographing down onto the surface of the water. But it looks like I'm in the water with it. I am not. That's a striped purple jelly on the right. And it was gotten entangled in the seaweed in the harbor. Got a comb jelly. This really needs video because these things rotate and they vibrate and they have luminescent colors. But this is photographed in a dish or a tray. One of my friends managed to find it. And here's an opalescent nudibranch. These things are, I don't know, just an inch to a couple inches long, but they're very fierce. And if 2 of them run into each other and they fight, apparently the winner eats the loser. And more Velellas. This is another one of my award-winning photos. This was taken in a bucket on a boat. I just was ecstatic to see these guys, and cleaned up the background a little bit. You see the large adult ones there, and that ochre color is actually an algae that lives symbiotically with the Velellas. And then you've got the babies, and you can see their little tentacles. It was a very special opportunity. Krill, I mentioned the importance of krill in the ecosystem. This was probably around 2012 when we had lots and lots of krill in the bay before the anchovies came and started eating it. And this was shooting over the side of the boat. I mean, there they were hanging out at the surface, these little shrimp-like creatures. Jellies. We have too many jellies. It shows we don't have enough turtles. We don't have other species. It's kind of an ocean out of balance. This happens periodically. These are more nettle jellies. Anchovies. This was taken off the Capitola Wharf back in about 2014. There were just anchovies everywhere. And they came when the water got warm, and then these squat lobsters, otherwise known as red pelagic crabs, who tend to swim what looks like backwards. They go tail first, and they like warmer water, and they came up during that period with the warm water and ended up all over Monterey. The gulls had a feast. This was inside the harbor. And finish up with photographs of human interactions. We've got kayakers, whale watchers. This guy's not nearly as close as he looks. It's foreshortened because of the telephoto lens. And if you just look closely, you'll see there's a bird looking like it's about to get swallowed by the whale. It's there for a little anchovy that's in front of it. It flew away beforehand. If it didn't, the whale would be forced to open its mouth because its throat is only the size of a grapefruit. Can't take a bird. I've seen pelicans caught that way, but they get released. With people doing clueless things when they're out there with the whales. And I guess that's their guide. He's decided that it's safe enough, but they're rather close to this whale taking a selfie. And here's a mother and son, even more clueless. They don't seem to realize that they've got whales behind them who've come up. My friend Jeff, who has put his camera away for the time being and is mimicking the calf. A calf has both eyes towards him, can see what Jeff is doing. And there's the mother, and you can see the escort in the background. Some Dominican fishermen. I haven't talked a whole lot about, technique and photography, but the silhouette can be a very excellent way to tell a story. These guys fish in a really tough way. They use compressors and go down. They get the bends a lot, and they spearfish, offering a fish for sale. Another Dominican fisherman from shore who just grabbed this octopus by a hand. And here it's like cropping for the action, to tell the story. This was one of our naturalists on board a Monterey Bay Whale Watch boat. This large giant squid was found floating on the surface. I don't know if it was caught in a fishing net or when the dolphins brought it up. The naturalist is looking for the beak to show, a hard beak to show the passengers. Necropsy team from the Marine Mammal Center and the California Academy of Sciences doing a necropsy on a juvenile humpback that washed ashore in Half Moon Bay. You can see the effort it takes to actually pull the skin and the blubber back, and you want to go into get the organs to see what had happened. It looked to me like this whale had probably been hit by a ship. And anchovies, this image I just learned took first place in a wildlife category and an all-women international photo competition. And anchovies end up inside Santa Cruz Harbor in 2014. They had oxygenators down the center channel, but they were dying in droves on the side. And when they die and they decay, it destroys the paint on boats. So they had suction machines, they had buckets, they had nets, anything to get the fish out of the water. Friend photographing a jelly and down in Mexico, swimming with a whale shark. My friend Jean, who runs Conscious Breath Adventures, the company I go out to the Silver Bank with, is dancing with a male dancer. There were two males who were practicing. Usually it's a male and a female. And Jean thought he would see if there was any interest. And apparently the whale stuck around for a bit. So just the last couple slides here. You're still awake. I now involved doing some science. And this is a paper. Some of you may have seen some of the media coverage where we did a playback. We recorded a contact call by a whale. We played it back the next day. A whale came over to our boat and swam around for 20 minutes in a call and response to the exemplar that we played into the water from a speaker. My Fluke ID photo identified her as a older female named Twain, and turned out she had been there the day before when we recorded the call. So it may have been her very own voice she was responding to. One of my images of a female killer whale named Louise on the Santa Cruz Metro bus, part of a big program that's getting lots of accolades. Most of the photos are by Franz Lanting. protecting our oceans one ride at a time. And you ride the bus enough and they will make a donation in your name to one of two foundations to help protect the oceans. And last but not least is a book that I have coming out later this year, Wild Monterey Bay, Up Close Personal Stories of Memorable Wildlife Encounters, where we interviewed 40 different people of their most memorable encounters and largely illustrated with my photographs. So with that, I would thank you for your attention. I hope you're still awake and take any questions. And I'm going to stop sharing.
I think William has a question or a couple questions.
Okay, and maybe you can help me if I can't hear because my hearing is really bad.
Are you still
Do
with us? There you are.
you want me to just, yeah, I threw it into the comments. I guess, my question is I'm watching all the, by the way, thank you. I mean, great presentation. I mean, this is amazing stuff. I mean, it's amazing that you can get all these shots. But part of my question is related to that so I imagine you must go out and there are times where maybe you don't see any whales, or you go out and you might be out on the water for 8 hours and maybe you see whales for 15 minutes. I'm guessing, and I guess I just wanted to hear a little bit about that.
It's not quite that bad.
Okay.
And I would say I do use Lightroom and Photoshop. Monterey Bay is a pretty extraordinary ecosystem. So we tend to have whales year round. So we have gray whales going south in, December, January. We have, a few humpbacks around in maybe January, February. It's, rains a lot, so we don't get out there too much. We have dolphins. We still have dolphins. Then in March, April, May, the grays start to come back, and then the killer whales show up. As I said, we have, tend to have Risso's dolphins on a regular basis. There are some, they're very, it's called getting skunked when you take a whale watch boat out and you don't see a whale. And then you have to give people, a coupon to come back again for free. That happens very infrequently in Monterey.
Got it.
Other areas are not quite so fortunate. We've always got sea lions around. We've always got, sea otters, dolphins, and some humpbacks spend the year. The younger ones don't necessarily, the juveniles don't always go down to the breeding grounds. They'll come back. They've started to come back now, and they'll be there all through the summer and the fall. We may have blue whales. The killer whales can show up anytime. Sometimes we've had fin whales. It changes every year. And sometimes it's slimmer than others. And sometimes, I remember being out one morning, and all we saw, this is a number of years ago, were 2 humpback whales. And they came up for air and they went back down. They didn't even bother to fluke. And if you've never seen a whale, that might be really exciting. If you've been out a lot, it's pretty ho-hum. We went back in the afternoon, and I swear to you, the whales said, "Oh, we had that boat in the morning," and they spent the next 2 hours swimming around. One had its head under the boat with its tail up, and they kept us captive. It was as if it was examining the underside of the boat. So you never know. But if you look at, Monterey Bay Whale Watch posts their daily sightings. So you can go on their website and get a sense of what's happening in the bay at any given time. And I can't speak for San Francisco Bay. I know it's not nearly as productive in terms of continuous wildlife. I know you've got harbor porpoise up there, and sometimes you've got humpback whales. The grays don't go into the bay, and it's different in different areas. So, yeah.
I just think that was incredible. I was going to go, oh, boring pictures, That I was so moved and so taken by it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. Yes, I covered up well, I'm not sharing my screen, so you can't see. I was going to say, I do have a website. I think you guys listed in the
Could you say it again?
Better. My website is my name, which is Jody You know what? I'm going to share my screen for just a second and you can take a look.
I'll put it in the chat as well.
Yeah. So there's my name, my website, and then my email address.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're quite welcome.
I want to say that Joanne brought Jody to us. So thank you to Joanne as well. And
Thank you.
it's always good to get referrals like this.
I've got a question.
Yes.
I've also swam with the humpbacks in Tonga and in Moorea. And have you swam with sperm whales in Dominica? I've heard a lot about that.
You know, we had had the opportunity in Tonga. We were having a hard time finding humpback whales. They were offshore. I mean, I think there's like the highway is further offshore, and one doesn't usually go there because the water conditions are not that nice. But we went outside of, the archipelago, and lo and behold, there were 2 sperm whales. Unfortunately, our guide, who is a brilliant photographer, but not so much of a behaviorist, said, well, there's no rules about swimming, with sperm whales, so everybody can swim at the same time, and which is like probably 8 of us or so. And the strong swimmers just kicked and swam like, there was no tomorrow. And sperm whales are really shy. And I got a glimpse of them. And I think the only person who got photographs of them was the leader, and the whales dove, and they can stay down for 20 minutes. They didn't stay that long. They came back up again. And I didn't see them the second time. But no, I haven't been to Dominica. Tried to at one point in time, but it was getting too difficult to organize the trip. That was a number of years ago. Have you?
No.
Oh. So, and did you enjoy Moorea more than, or how would?
I saw more whales. It was like 7 days of snorkeling, and it was multiple encounters every single day in the Vava. Is it Vava'u, the northern Tonga chain? Yeah.
Yeah.
In the channels, not far from the islands. Yeah.
Yeah.
I found the humpbacks very shy. I mean, occasionally a calf would swim underneath us, but again, if you'd swim up, 30, 40 feet away, and you'd make too much noise, with your flippers, they would get scared and then they'd swim away.
What I found in Tonga is there aren't there are too many boats, there aren't enough whales, and you're only allowed to have 4 people in the water at a time, and it's very difficult for an operator to make a living with 4 people. So, you're taking turns, like you might have your guide, your leader and 3 people in the water, and then the whales come up to breathe, and they go back down, and then you switch out. And I find that's much more disruptive to the whales than what happens out on the Silver Bank, where you can have, I think it's like 10 or 12 people in the water at a time. So your whole group, it's as many people as we have in a tender. And there are enough whales that generally each tender has its own group of whales at any given time, which, you don't always have them, but when you do have them. And the whales become accustomed to you being there because you're not constantly getting in and out. And people have to learn to swim so that they're not splashing the water with their flippers. Because when you make that noise, the whales just go, I'm out of here.
Right.
So it's easier if, what we do is we're out there on a liverboard for a week, and we get a chance to practice the swimming without the whales, and hopefully people get better at it. And yeah.
What I
So-
thought was amazing was like, you'd float at the surface. You'd see the humpbacks 100 feet below you just lounging around.
Yeah.
Then they slowly rise up to the surface. They were below you. They turn over and look at you. Then they move out of the way so they didn't hit you on the way up. Then they move. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
The things they do. I will say, I've been working on a paper with a couple of colleagues on humpback whales that blow bubble rings, not bubble nets, but rings like people blow smoke rings.
Mhm.
We're just resubmitting it. We're hoping it will get published this time around. And we only found 11 whales around the world that have been observed doing this. And they seem, we've got 2 accounts of whales doing it inside of a bubble net where they blow 3 rings at the end. But the rest are whales who have either approached boats or approached people or come up underneath people to blow these bubble rings. So go figure. Anyways. Any other questions?
When you were at Santa Cruz, did you have Ken Norris as a professor, biology of marine mammals?
I did not. I had him as a neighbor though.
Oh.
It's just across the canyon from me. No, it's a good question. I don't think he was there yet when I was in school. And I did have the opportunity once to go out onto the coastal terraces with him and listen to him talk. And we looked from there over towards Moss Landing, so you could see out across the bay. And he, brought our attention to the curvature of the earth, which you could actually see at that distance. But I think he came later because I know a good friend of mine who was a student of his who lived on my land, and by then that was in the 70s. And by the time I went back to school and he was there, I was studying photography. So no, I missed out on that.
He was good. It was mid-70s when I had a class from him there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, he was a pretty amazing guy.
Looks like Michael has a question. I think you're muted, Michael.
I'm muted. Okay. My question is, you might have said this at the beginning. I wasn't here at the beginning, but I'm interested. It was amazing, and just seeing some of what we share the planet with, that I've never seen like that. But anyway, the question is equipment and your workflow and the effects you do after. What do you do, and how do you get these pictures that don't look like you're right next to the animal, but they're so sharp and clear. And I'm just curious, like you said, you had a 100-500 lens. I'm curious what body you have and how do you get it to be so sharp and amazing, and all the colors of the sky, everything looks pretty perfect. So that's my question. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, they talk about practice makes perfect. Been doing this for many years now, but it's, some of it's equipment and some of it is, if you're photographing, and I mean, I showed you a huge broad variety. So some of the photographs were taken from land, some of them were taken in the water, a lot of them were taken on a boat. You're shooting from a boat, you've got to have a fast enough shutter speed that you take into account the motion of the boat and you take into account the motion of the animals. So, just as a general, I generally shoot at, and general is, there's always exceptions. Let's say a 2,000th of a second, right? If I'm on a boat. And again, it depends. If I'm in the harbor and it's dark and there's the sea otters and they're not moving very much, I may drop my shutter speed. I found with the underwater stuff, and I moved from, I had to actually print out my insurance, my insurance form. You can't see that, when I bought my equipment, because I can't keep track of it, but I had for a long time, I was shooting with a Canon 70 Mark III topside, and I loved that camera, but it was also a crop sensor. So that has something to do with getting closer. About, it was a 400 millimeter lens. Underwater, initially, I worked up from the 20D to, I think maybe I can't remember if I was using then I was using a 5D Mark III. And I was frustrated because my friends were getting sharper photos than I was. I had to buy a decent lens. And, I don't know, if you're a Canon person or not, but I ended up getting a 16 EF 16 to 35 millimeter f2.8, lens. And that made a huge difference. So sometimes it's, the equipment can be incredibly important. I showed you images with a whole variety of cameras. Obviously the underwater, disposable camera did not take anything near the quality of some of the better cameras, or even cell phones today. But I probably crop almost every image in post just because I want the composition to be just so. And it's very difficult to get when you're on a boat. It's one thing if you're shooting landscapes, for instance, you've got a tripod, landscape's not going anywhere, you got to deal with the light, but you can frame it exactly the way you want to. You can't do that with, with wildlife that's moving a lot. You might be able to do that with a sleeping elephant seal on shore. So I'll do a certain amount of cropping, I'll do as little as I can get away with, but sometimes it's a whole lot. I will process my images in Lightroom these days and sometimes use Photoshop. Sometimes, I'll do some sharpening in Lightroom. And if necessary, I will use Topaz to do some noise reduction. But the R5, which I've found to be, initially was an incredibly challenging to switch to mirrorless. And there's still things about it that I don't like. But it has outstanding image quality. And it, makes that part a whole lot easier. But even the 5D Mark IV, which I've now upgraded to, because I flooded my Mark III a couple of years, last year, I guess it was. And thank God my insurance company covered the new camera, and I was able to, they don't sell the Mark III anymore. I was able to use the Mark IV with a modification, use the same housing. But I hope that helps answer your question.
I have one question. Do you shoot RAW mostly or JPEG or how do
I
you do
shoot raw. Yeah, I shoot all raw. And except for my trusty cell phone. And that's the thing, which is, it frustrates me in that I feel like I'm cheating, but it's a whole lot easier to use my cell phone for video or even wide angle sometimes. But I know I had that one image there of the three, it was black and white, that was shot in color, of the three northern right whale dolphins, the two heads and the tail. And I did use my 5D Mark III for that. I would not have gotten the same quality with a phone or the same file size to be able to blow it up at all. So, yeah, I mean, it's, it's one of those things that I studied a lot of art history through my university days, as I was always interested. And I come from a family with a lot of artists, from writers to filmmakers to, cousin who is designing whatever it is, the fancy gallery across from the White House. He designs museum exhibits. Another who's an architect. My mother made jewelry. She did all kinds of things. So I had a background of, the importance of art, was taken to museums and things, looked at a lot of work, and then looked at a lot of photographs to figure out what was important composition, what touched me in images, because it's not just composition, it's emotion that's in there. There was a photographer who I won't mention by name, but who was doing whale photos, and he was actually doing large, what do you call it? Large format images. And the sharpness on these things was spectacular. But to me, people were, blown away because he could make them really, really large prints. I was not touched by them. They didn't have, you know, I didn't connect with them. There wasn't an emotional content in there. And the question is, you know, how do you get that in an image? But, you know, that's not the question you were asking, but I take into account all of those things and then, you know, attempting to get the photograph so that, you know, it's sharp enough. And some of that is having a steady hand and shooting with a high enough shutter speed. You
And
know?
feeling.
Thank you. Great.
And you know, if you're on a boat, learning how to brace yourself. Because you can't use a tripod because it'll just, you know, just bring the vibration up from the engines from the boat. So
All right.
I spent a lot of time on boats because I really like it out there. So and the thing is, the opposite is when I'm shooting underwater, I'm using a really slow shutter speed. You know, it's like 1/25th of a second, maybe 250th. But it's a whole, you know, the light down there is different. It's a lot less light. The animals aren't moving really fast. You know, and sometimes let's put it this way. I don't use the machine gun style of, you know, just holding my shutter button down, in part because I've already got enough external hard drives and I'm not that good at deleting stuff, but I do shoot a lot. And, you know, just to pick out the images for this presentation and not go, you know, not go over an hour was a challenge. Because I have other things in there, not that they're necessarily, you know, outstanding images, but they're other species and other behavior and things like that. So, you know, part of it, I think a lot of it, to actually answer your question, is knowing how to edit and knowing which image to, you know, which is your best image of a group of images.
I hope you come back and do the rest of them.
Yeah.
Jody came up with a really cool photo challenge. I'm going to share my screen for a moment. Maybe you want to say something about this. I used your title. You want to read it to us?
No, you can go ahead.
All right. So our May challenge is water. You can get really creative because obviously you may not be in the ocean, but I think it'll be really fun to see what people come up with as far as shooting water. And I hope you all go out and actually shoot and don't use your old images. And
I hope I gave you a hint on that with my second slide of those trees, where, you know, I brought that up. It was actually, you know, I shot that with film and then, you know, to digitize the image, but because I didn't just want to talk with my opening slide. And that was the kind of work I was doing back when I was at university. But as I looked at it, I was thinking, this is about water too, because that fog, which is water, makes that image. So, you know, be creative in your ideas of what constitutes water and photography.
Cool.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming tonight. Thank you so much, Jody.
You're quite welcome.
This is amazing.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Thanks for doing this, Stephanie.
And Joanne, thank you for your recommendation. I hope you all will start sending me ideas. I'm almost at the end of my list. I think, let's see, do we have any?
For speaker, you mean for speakers?
Yeah, sorry, yeah. I've had, so William is next month. And I have a note here that I wrote and I don't even know what it means, so.
There's another question in there from William. In your chat?
Let's see. Go for it.
Like, are you still here, William?
I am. Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. You want to ask it?
Well, actually, I kind of reworded it when I asked it verbally. That was sort of what I was getting at, because I was interested in how much time you spend out on the water, you know, and I was imagining, you know, being out on the water and, you know, coming back and, well, we didn't see any whales today. So I think you kind of answered it.
Well, it's not that it's not that bad, but this question is an important one, the way you phrased it in the chat, which is how much time do you spend waiting?
Okay.
When I'm in the Dominican Republic, I'm not just underwater. I then go to the other side of the island where I have a friend who started whale watching in the Dominican Republic. And I go out on her boats, topside whale watching. And she always talks about whale waiting because even though, you are almost, you're never guaranteed, but I've never been out on Monterey Bay that we haven't seen dolphins or whales. Okay.
Right.
But you spend a lot of time without seeing them. And the more often you go out, the more likely you are to see something interesting. So just to answer this question, right now I'm trying to go out once a week. And part of that is just to stay and keep my skills going. Because of the social side of it, I enjoy being out there with, my friends and interacting. I live on my own. I pretty much cloistered away here. And, but there was a period where I would go out 3 times a week. And, the more you are out, the more you will see, but you also, there's some days I come back and go, yeah, I should have stayed home, where it was not all that exciting. So it's not SeaWorld, You're not guaranteed to have, animals do something. They've got their own agenda. But yeah,
Thank you.
sure. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you for having me. And I hope you guys go out and do a little whale watching.
It was
Maybe-
fabulous. Thank you.
Thank
Maybe
you.
I'll see you out there.
Thank
And
you all for coming.
I look forward to your book coming out too, so definitely.
Thank you. Yes, I'll let you know when it's published. And if anybody, has a hankering to go up to Alaska, you can get in touch with me about that one too. So
If you come on to our Facebook page, feel free to promote your book.
okay, sounds good. Look at it. I'm getting ready for that, but we still got to get it
Yeah. Okay.
finalized. So, all right. Well, thank you,
Good
everyone.
night, everybody.
Thank you.
See you all next month. We'll be here to support William. Bye,
Cool,
everyone.
cool. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.